The countdown to the Final Four is in its final hours, and we have everything you need to know before tonight's games tip off. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Friday. You are locked on to women's basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today, we'll chat all about tonight's games between South Carolina and Texas, as well as UCLA, who's taking on UConn. We'll also make sure to highlight players we expect to make an impact this weekend and what we're excited to see in the Final Four. Joining me today is The Next's Big East beat reporter, T. Baker, who will be live in Tampa for these games. So, T, starting off, let's recap a little bit since it's been a long week for all of us. How did South Carolina and Texas make it to the Final Four?
Well, I think they made it to the Final Four, relying on their culture in a lot of ways. I think in particular, defensive intensity, there's just a standard at both of those programs. So I think that's part of it, and elite talent, right? Both of them have very elite talent. In particular, I think that for South Carolina, a big reason that they're headed to Tampa is because of Mylesia Fulwiley. There were moments where there was some stagnant offense, or South Carolina just needed a big shot against Duke, and it always seemed to be Mylesia Fulwiley who stepped up. And then I think on the Texas end, just absolutely suffocating defense. I think there was like 3 5-second violations on the inbounds against TCU, and that's just intensity. And so that, coupled with the talent of Madison Booker and Rory Harmon, I think these teams were number 1 seeds for a reason, and it makes sense to me that they're headed to Tampa.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch them play again. This is their 4th matchup. The team split the regular season meetings. South Carolina defeated Texas in the SEC tournament. What else intrigues you about this matchup that we're seeing yet again this season?
I mean, I'm a little mixed on it being an SEC rivalry, right? Because I love that. And I think what's great is that Texas just joined the SEC. Now this is a budding rivalry, and I hope it sets the standard of this is a rivalry for years to come in the conference. At the same time, like you said, we've seen these teams play so many times, and typically I always have thought that the NCAA tried to avoid those types of matchups, but just the way the S-curve shook out this time, I think for me, it's just the 2 games that they had were hard-fought games. Sorry, the 3 games that they had were hard-fought games. South Carolina seems to have had the edge, and I think that they in particular had the edge at home and in the conference tournament, where they were virtually at home in terms of their home crowd. But you can't blame it on the crowd necessarily. I just think it's a factor, right? So this will be a neutral court. It'll be interesting to see just how they perform on that stage.
Yeah, and looking at what each team needs to do to win, just a fun stat that I kept hearing on the broadcast, so I had to look further into it. According to Sports Reference, Texas makes 3.1 threes per game at a rate of 30%. And then, defensively, let me just make sure that I've got those stats properly pulled up. They're only allowing 3.7 threes per game, which is second in the country. And their opponents are only shooting less than 28%. And then South Carolina still doesn't shoot a lot of threes, but in comparison to Texas, it's a lot. South Carolina is making 5.8 threes per game at a rate of 33.7%. And only allowing about 5 threes a game at just under 30%, 29.2%. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out. That doesn't necessarily answer the question that I just posed, but just a fun stat that I want to throw in there about, I'm just interested to see, how the whole 3-point shooting plays a factor, or if we just ignore that there's a 3-point line in general and that's what happens. But back to my original question, what does each team need to do to win?
Well, I think it's definitely useful, like context for the style of play. They aren't as reliant on the three-pointer. We know UConn is a very different team in that way. They shoot a lot of threes. They make a lot of threes. And so I think for these teams, like I think the keys are for South Carolina is just breaking the intensity of the Texas defense. That also kind of goes for Texas against South Carolina. Both are very defense-driven teams that really focus on that end of the court. So I mean, I think sometimes this time of the year, it comes down to who makes shots and who can pull the plays off, right? Like you've practiced, you've gotten to this point, you know who your team is at this point. It's really about who can make plays, who's ready for the moment, and how do you handle, the bright lights and the stakes.
Yeah, definitely. And, just looking at the Lobos look, the comparison tool through her hoop stats, they're two very similar teams in terms of like points they score, points they allow, possessions per 40 minutes, points per 100 possessions. It's just going to be really interesting. I know we've seen it 3 times, but it's going to be interesting to see again to kind of see what happens and maybe see if there's anything different. I know, coaches, at least this happened in the Atlantic 10 tournament, like coaches were kind of excited to see a team a third time because they kind of knew what to expect. So I don't have the answer to this, but it'll be interesting to see, if that's a factor at play, could be a benefit or a downside of seeing this matchup yet again.
Yeah, I mean, they always say it's really hard to beat someone 3 times, and that's why sometimes in the way this season plays out, if you meet a team in the postseason, like UCLA versus USC is a good example. UCLA beat them. Sorry, USC beat UCLA twice in the regular season, but then it's really hard to do it a third time, and that's what because you figured out some things, you can make adjustments. So in this case, South Carolina holds the 2-1 advantage, and it's really hard to beat a team 3 times. So we'll see. We'll see if they can. If Texas can step up. I think Texas has a lot of experience and star power. Like Maddie Booker is just incredible talent. Rory Harmon is just a solid presence. And so it's 2 teams that play a similar brand of basketball and know each other. And I think it's going to be just very exciting to see in this setting.
Yeah, I mean, you say it's hard to beat a team 3 times, but it's also hard to beat South Carolina twice in a season. They do not lose a lot of basketball. So that's definitely another factor. But yeah, excited, just really excited to watch that at 7 p.m. Eastern time. But we've talked about a lot of players. Are there any other players that you think people should keep an eye on? Whether key bench player, a starter that maybe someone in the Northeast isn't as aware of on Texas.
I mean, I think for me, it does come down to Rory Harmon is kind of the X factor, and she's not the player that always gets the attention, but she is just a consistent player. If you saw her halftime interview in the Elite Eight game, she was poised, and I think that she's really the one. Maddie Booker is maybe going to get the spotlight, but I think Rory Harmon is the one that is a bit of the stabilizer at that point guard position. And then on South Carolina, I think a lot of fans are familiar with their cast at this point, but I think one of the X factors is Chloe Kitts. When she's played well and she's held down that position in the paint, I think they've had better outcomes. And really, I think she's going to be the presence in the post this year that is filling in for both Cardoso, who left to graduation, and Ashlyn Watkins, who was injured. And so I think that how she performs in the post against Texas post is going to make a huge difference for the Gamecocks.
Yeah. And just, it's hard to pull out just 1 or 2 players from South Carolina because they have 6 players that average at least 8 points per game. And then another 2. So if you total them all up, 8 total players that average at least 5 points per game. And I think that's both really dangerous and could pose an issue for Texas, depending on who goes off. It's hard to prepare for 8 players in Texas played Monday, 4 days, basically, really like 3.5, because you have to travel and sleep theoretically at some point. But yeah, 8 players that average at least 5 points per game is just really impressive and not at all surprising from South Carolina.
Yeah, it's all by committee, and I think that's one thing that I heard some analysis on. Like maybe they don't have a star player, and that could be an advantage or a downfall. I think when you look at all of Dawn Staley's national championship winning teams, there was a star post. It was Asia Wilson. It was Aaliyah Boston. It was Camila Cardoso. It was like, when in doubt, just give it to your star and let them take over in the post. And this year they don't quite have that. So it'll be interesting to see down the stretch in tight games, like who their go-to is. To me, I think it's Mylasia Fulwiley, but they have to get that consistency from everyone in the absence of having a star who could just kind of take over.
Yeah, definitely. Well, coming up next, we'll talk about the late matchup on Friday night, UCLA and UConn. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Daylight savings snuck up on us again, and if you're feeling that lost hour of sleep, 5 Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through. Whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5 Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. I've been staying up late watching all the tournament action, and 5 Hour Energy helps me keep up the next day. I love the peach mango flavor. And when I'm at games or just traveling in general, 5 Hour Energy is easy to grab and keeps me feeling refreshed. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. Need one now? Grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They're everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized. Today's episode is brought to you by Wayfair. Spring is here, and that means it's home project season. Whether you're refreshing a room or tackling a full renovation, Wayfair is the best kept secret for all things home improvement. From small updates like stylish cabinet hardware to major upgrades like new vanities, sinks, or outdoor lighting, Wayfair has quality products for every budget. I just upgraded my living room with Wayfair, and the selection was incredible. Their free and fast shipping made it so easy, and there was no hauling heavy items from the store. And I love that they have top brands like GE at great prices. Plus, shopping was seamless, and I found exactly what I needed to fit my space and style. Wayfair makes home improvement easy. Get started now at wayfair.com. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. Okay, so kind of quick little recap again. Been a long week for everyone. How did UCLA and UConn both make it to the Final Four?
So UConn's path to the Final Four, in general, I think was relatively smooth. I think there were some tense moments in the beginning of the Sweet 16 and Elite Elite 8 games, but UConn made the Final Four with their talent, their execution, their defensive intensity. We can't ignore what Paige Bueckers has been doing. I think it was 3 consecutive 30-plus games, which is a UConn record in the NCAA tournament. And I think a UConn record in any context, 3 games in a row. So like, that's just a different level of play. And when you have a player like Paige who can do that, and a defense needs to pay attention to them, but then you also have Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd. Like it's just a tough matchup. And when all 3 are on fire, I think this team is really hard to beat. So UConn got there on talent and just, being healthy and having depth for the first time in several seasons. I think for UCLA, this is such a significant win, them getting to the Final Four and finally getting over that hump. I think that's kind of been the narrative around Corey Close and her program is they're always right there but can't get there. So I'm thrilled that they broke through just as a program. I think it's symbolic of what they've accomplished over the past several years, and I think it's a testament to the roster that Corey Close has built, both through recruiting and then through the transfer portal by getting Lauren Betts, who is one of the best players in the country, first team All-American, and they just really have talent that helped them get here.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk more about Paige Bueckers later because I have a very fun throwback to our preview pod last year. But, before we get there, what intrigues you about this matchup? For me, I'm really interested to see how Lauren Betts is able to go offensively, and how UConn will guard her. But then also where Lauren Betts is guarding UConn, like how that whole thing fits in. I don't think UConn has faced, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think UConn has faced a player like Lauren Betts, that combination of height and talent all in one, a player like her yet this season.
Yeah, no, I don't think they have either. I think, and a lot of teams haven't when they meet her, because she's both, 6'7", 6'8", depending on how you're measuring. And also just incredibly talented, and her game has evolved. She's playing with such tremendous confidence, and that's really hard to match up against. But I think that what's going to be intriguing about that is, Sarah Strong is UConn's primary post player. It's been feeling like she's been getting all the rebounds. She's been getting double doubles. She's been their post presence. She's facing a much taller opponent in Lauren Betts, more of a back to the basket post. And I think UConn's post play, we have Janelle Alfie on the center alongside Ice Brady as their bigs, but both have had some inconsistency throughout the season. I think both of those players aren't really necessary to be huge scorers for UConn, but they bring important dynamics. I think particularly when Ice Brady's in the game, she can extend the floor a bit because she can hit a jumper or a three, and it's another player that the opposing team has to guard. So I think what I'm intrigued and interested to see is how Gino and the coaching staff for UConn manage those minutes, and how they sort of shift between small and big lineups.
Yeah, definitely. So now to this big Paige Bueckers question. I asked you a very, very similar question last year, but it is still incredibly relevant. Paige Bueckers has been absolutely phenomenal in the NCAA tournament, as you mentioned. But who else needs to continue to be impactful for UConn in the Final Four? Because, UConn isn't built to win games just because Paige Bueckers is scoring 30 or 40 points like she did last weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think for UConn, we've talked about the talent, and it's well documented and covered. AZ Fudd, Sarah Strong, Paige Bueckers. What I don't think is talked about enough is the talent that comes off the bench for UConn, in Ashlyn Shade and KK Arnold, and they both just bring a toughness and intensity that is really hard for other teams to navigate, especially because they're not in the starting lineup. They come off the bench, they add a boost after that first media timeout, and it's easy to forget, past tournaments and things kind of fade into the background in our memories, but they were starters last year for the Final Four out of necessity. So they have experience at that high level. They have experience as starters, but they've really found their niche coming off the bench. And I think that's what makes UConn such a tough team, is the depth and the talent they have coming off the bench in the specific ways that they can impact the game.
Yeah. And, what do you think the keys to success will be for both teams?
For UConn, I think it's, I think if two out of the three big three are shooting well and performing, they're a really hard team to beat. If all three of them are, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to defeat them. So I think if at least one of Paige, Sarah, or AZ is kind of performing alongside one of the other ones, if someone else has a bad game, but if two of three of them are there, I think that's a key, as well as the depth that we talked about. For UCLA, I think it's just about taking advantages of the mismatches with Lauren Betts, but also they are a team with a lot of tremendous talent at the guard position. So hitting shots, doing the things that they need to do to get open shots against UConn's defense, and scoring at all three levels.
Yeah, definitely. As East Coast people, we don't get a lot of opportunities to watch UCLA, especially in person. Are there any players on UCLA that you're excited, both as someone who just enjoys watching women's basketball and a journalist, that you're excited to see Friday and maybe Sunday?
I mean, for me, Kiki Rice is a player that I just love to watch. I think she's really poised, talented. She moves well without the ball, and is a great ball handler. So for me, a lot of the attention is on Lauren Betts, but Kiki Rice is a player that I've always really enjoyed watching and has tremendous talent. So I'm looking forward to that and seeing, how they can compete against UConn's guards in that defensive intensity.
Yeah, definitely. And I just looked it up because I was curious. UCLA also has 8 players that average at least 5 points per game. So another really, I guess that's generally how you make it here, unless you're last year's UConn team, I guess.
Yeah.
Depth is usually really important at this time of year. It definitely helps. Teams are playing like upwards of 35 games at least right now, going into like the late 30s. UCLA, it'll be their 37th game. So depth is also really important this time of year.
Yeah, like you said, especially this time of year, it's about having that extra push at the end of a game. You got to put it all on the floor, and just having multiple players who you can rely on if someone's having a bad game or not shooting the way that you want them to. Like having that depth is really, one of the ways that there's advantages this time of year, because the margin of error is so slim.
Definitely. Well, coming up next, we'll talk about what we're excited about as the Final Four keeps coming closer. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening 4 days in a row this weekend, there's always something exciting to bet on. FanDuel makes it easy to back my favorite teams with spreads, totals, and game props. There are so many different ways to bet on tonight's Final Four games, same game parlays, as well as who will score the first basket and if there will be overtime, and so much more. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Okay, so you'll be in Tampa. What are you most excited for at the Final Four? And then I'll share my answers.
I am most excited to just see these coaches in action. Honestly, it's like just a masterclass of coaches. Corey Close got Coach of the Year. We know that Gino Auriemma, John Staley, we know their pedigree. We know that the way that they've performed at such a high level for a while now. And so is Vic Schaefer across multiple schools. So I'm just really excited to see these teams and their coaches, all who have, slightly different styles, and how coaches make adjustments in game, and kind of just seeing legends of our game on the coaching sideline, is duke it out for a title.
Yeah, definitely. I am really excited because we're going to see some form of history or fun stuff happening. UConn, Paige Beckers wins a title in her final season, or UConn wins their first title in 2016, or UCLA wins their first title since it won the AIAW tournament in 1978. That was behind Ann Myers and Anita Ortega. It's their first NCAA tournament Final Four. For Texas, it would be their first title since 1986 under legendary coach Jody Conrad. South Carolina would repeat and win its third championship in the last 4 years, and first repeat championship since the UConn four-peat from 2013 to 2016. So, yes, I had to get those historical references in, but we're going to be seeing some form of history, or things that haven't happened in a while happen, and to me that's just really exciting.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's an excellent point because these teams just have that historical pedigree too, like in the 80s or in the AIAW days, UCLA and Texas were two of the top programs. And so to see them have that resurgence and same with USC. I mean, they were a game away from getting there. Another program with just legendary pedigree who maybe necessarily haven't been at the top for a while and kind of seeing that cycle back. I love that aspect of it. And like you said, Jody Conrad, legendary coach of Texas, it was very cool to see her sort of in the background of those games and just, like the way that she set the foundation for them to be here today.
Yeah, definitely. Always love seeing those players, and we'll see if she makes it to Tampa. I'm sure she'll do everything in her power to get there. But and what other historic players are going to make these appearances for those programs like Texas, UCLA? What former Yukon players are we going to see? Aside from Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi, who are going to be up in a corner doing their DT and Bird or whatever they call it, the alternate broadcast. And then obviously South Carolina, like what South Carolina legends are going to be there. Just always so much fun. And I'm getting even more excited thinking about it with it just a few hours away. And then also, excited for so much wonderful coverage from our friends at The Next. We've got a great crew going. Very jealous I won't be there. And then, just excited to see, all the content that comes from it, social media, Locked On Women's Basketball, stories at The Next. Make sure you're subscribed to both Locked On Women's Basketball and thenexthoops.com and follow us on social media. You're going to see a lot of great, behind the scenes things, a lot of great stories. Just excited for all of it. Any final thoughts for you of like a player you forgot you mentioned wanting to talk about, or, anything else that you're excited about?
I think I'll just echo what you said. Like, there are so many different storylines in the game. And I think, it's so exciting to be part of The Next and going down with a crew who we cover it from so many different angles, right? Like we cover the winning team, the losing team, but not just that, like players, individual coaching storylines. Like there's so many stories to tell. And I'm just excited that we get the chance to tell them.
Yeah, definitely. One story that has just been more front of mind than it usually is was Jen Hatfield's story on Last Year POA from the 2023 Final Four. She went into the locker room not expecting to write and, comes out with this really great story. And I that has just been front of mind since I was in Baton Rouge for the first two rounds. But just excited for all the things that we can expect. And, regardless of the outcome, something cool and once in a lifetime for these players is going to happen.
Absolutely.
So, where can the people find you and your work if they're looking forward to reading all your stuff coming up this weekend?
Well, definitely subscribe to The Next. That's where I'll be writing. And typically I'll be posting on my Instagram page. So behind the scenes stuff at T Baker WBB. And, just in general, continue to follow our work, follow this channel, because we're going to have everything covered through shorts and other video content that really hopefully takes everyone behind the scenes of the Final Four.
Yes, I can't wait. I know I get to see all the behind the scenes and like all the chatter about what goes on, but I'm excited to see it as someone who will be watching from my couch. Well, thank you for joining me today. And thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And make sure to tune in tomorrow to hear from our WNBA draft crew and every Monday through Saturday for more women's basketball coverage 365 days a year.